On this episode of Newt's World, as Election Day nears, I wanted to have someone on who has taken a unique look at polling data in this election cycle. He's been studying the swing states and methodically going through county by county to understand how each state will perform. He's been looking at low propensity voters, independent voters, and has analyzed the early vote. He is one of the most knowledgeable pollsters on the upcoming election, and he approaches it from a very unique perspective. So I'm really pleased to welcome my guest, pollster Seth Keshel. He is on Telegram and on Substack. His site is Captain K's Corner. Seth, welcome, and thank you for joining me on Newt's World.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. It's like we were talking about before I jumped on. It's an honor to get to collaborate with you, especially as we approach a very important day.
I have to ask you, how did your military intelligence background help you as you thought about the election polling business?
I've always been a numbers guy. I'm a baseball guy at heart. God did not give me the ability to be a great athlete, but he gave me the mind to appreciate the numbers. And I was a baseball analyst in college at Ole Miss and wound up joining Army ROTC following the family tradition in the military. Wound up as an Army intelligence officer, tactical level, never went beyond the rank of captain, just served 6 years. And my job requirements were to understand lots of data points, lots of events over a massive expanse. So we're talking about an area the size of Georgia and Western Afghanistan, and to be able to boil that down into digestible pieces of information to give to my commander to inform his decision making. So we have 50 different states. We have Washington, D.C. We have 2 split districts. We have more than 50 separate elections that contribute 538 electoral votes. And they all bounce in different directions, and they have different variables and different trends, racial, ethnic, socioeconomic trends. And I'm able to balance and understand these. I can spot inaccuracies in media reporting and also narratives. And in 2016, when Ohio was given to Trump by the media 2 months out and it was going to be 5+, I knew right away there was no way that matched up with a Clinton plus 10 or 12 point popular vote map. Ohio had only missed the presidential winner twice since 1896. So I went back, deconstructed the map, learned about voter registration by party trend, and figured out pretty quickly that Trump was on pace to grab Pennsylvania, Michigan, and I wound up calling all 50 states right in 2016. And one of the reasons we have issues with 2020 based on the analysis is because it defied every single trend indicator, bellwether, and predictor known to political analysts since the 1800s.
How do you explain that?
Well, it's about ballots. I did an event in Los Angeles in January with Brad Parscale, who used to work with the Trump campaign. First time I'd met the guy. And being exposed to so many different viewpoints allows you to understand what other people are seeing out there. And he referred to certain states as messaging states, like Florida, Texas. Florida got an anti-communist message. You're going to pull Florida easily these days. Texas, big energy message, freedom message. But other states like Pennsylvania, he referred to as ballot states, where the messaging no longer matters as much. Now, Trump's messaging plays up there with the working class message, but collecting ballots is what has to happen. So getting in there and throwing a wrench in the screws of the mail-in agenda is important. Getting the early vote out is important. But that's where the 2020 election broke all the rules, went around all the legislatures, which have the authority, the only authority to change election law. So really, you could make the case that most of the 2020 election was not even conducted under a legal premise. But those were what were responsible for generating this low propensity turnout, ensuring that everybody's casting a vote rather than having the traditional political indicators of enthusiasm, which Trump had an enthusiasm gap over Biden and probably an even bigger one over Harris this year.
So there are 2 things here. One is that voter registration tells you a lot, and the other is that there can be mechanisms that overwhelm the registration.
Correct. Usually if it's consistent enough and strong enough, it's very hard to buck against the voter registration trend. For the data in Pennsylvania, I can find one county that sometimes bucks, and that's Allegheny County. So if the trend isn't significant, it's less than a point, and the rest of the electorate is made up of left-leaning urban independents, then yes, that may push your margins. But voter registration by party is far more accurate than polling. And the thing is, you can backdate this and go back as long as you have the data and find that the trends correctly predict, especially the larger the sample, statewide registration especially, it correctly predicts the trajectory of the next election. And right now, every single meaningful state in the country that registers voters by party is on a heavy Republican trend. There's only one state in the entire country that registers by party that is moving towards the Democrats. You know which one that one is?
No, I was going to say, I'm very curious now.
It's Colorado.
Well, that's because of the Californians.
It is. It's also Denver's dominance is 2/3 of the vote right up there in Denver and the surrounding counties. So it's pretty much overwhelmed the entire countryside.
What's happening in Denver that's different than other states that have large cities but are migrating towards the Republicans?
And Denver doesn't have a big working class dynamic. A place like Pittsburgh, of course, you're talking about steel mills and refineries, and especially the surrounding areas, Westmoreland, Washington counties, Armstrong counties. Denver is more of the glass and concrete financial place where you have a lot of white liberals that are going there. You have a different mindset. You have the drug culture in Denver is a big thing that's going on there. You have all sorts of liberal movements, feminism movements that drag the culture of the area to the left. Of course, northwest of Denver, you've got Boulder, which fences that in. So even the surrounding countrysides, Larimer County that Bush carried in 2004, those have drifted as well. They're even eating into the margins in El Paso County, Douglas County, south of Denver. So really, Colorado is, unless the Hispanic vote really grows and surges to the right, Colorado is looking like a stronger Democrat version than even Minnesota is, probably a consistent 10-point Democrat state.
Yeah, well, of course, Minnesota, there's a poll out that Trump's only 3 points behind.
I agree with it. Number one, it's interesting because I've never believed that the vice presidential selection does a lot with moving the math on a state. So a lot of people thought Josh Shapiro would move the math on Pennsylvania. I'm not so sure it would have. It may have created a narrative for what needs to be done for Harris to win Pennsylvania, which looks impossible to me. But with Minnesota, it's a very similar state in my analytics to Virginia. I ballpark both of those states at about 3 to 5 points, just as a default setting, which of course could be close enough with a turnout differential to swing that. But Hennepin and Ramsey counties are dominant counties, and they're huge margins, and they're full of white liberals and not a lot of blue collar population. So they are very tough lifts for Trump because the outlying areas are somewhat maxed out, especially in Minnesota. But this is a reason we play the game. Same thing with college football every Saturday. There's a reason they line up and play the game.
I couldn't help when you were talking about baseball. I mean, the huge impact 10 or 15 years ago of really good mathematical modeling and how it changed the Oakland A's, et cetera. I think baseball may be the most numbers-oriented of all the sports.
Definitely. Moneyball was something that I read it when it first came out as a book in 2002. Thought it was fascinating. You got a team out there that's overshadowed by the San Francisco Giants. Of course, now the Oakland A's are gone from Oakland. They're going to Sacramento until they wind up in Las Vegas eventually. But had to figure out how to get it done on a shoestring budget, and they would draft first rounders and give them a smaller signing bonus, and they relied heavily on scouting. Likewise, remember the 2016 Trump campaign relied heavily on different types of data analytics. They would go through the crowds at the rallies, and they would peg about how many people used to vote for Obama. There you go, the two-time Obama voter in the Midwest being the reason Donald Trump won the presidency in the first place. And when people can fully understand the power of a coalition shift where their side starts voting for you, it's not really a new thing. When you were speaker, Texas was still electing Democrats at the state level, and some of the southern states were still putting Democrat governors in there, and eventually that went all the way down to the state houses. But Texas still had a state legislature that was Democrat-run in the 21st century.
Based on your registration analysis, I noticed that on Sean Spicer's podcast about 10 days ago, you said New Hampshire ought to be considered the 8th battleground state, and I just saw a poll yesterday that showed Trump up by 1, which I think shocked everybody.
I sent that over to Sean. So I called back in July when I was parceling out these states. In my opinion, if you can't call 37 states red or blue decisively, you have no business being involved in this. And I think that actually points to a bigger problem with the polarization in the country. I think that, going back even into the 60s to the 80s, there was only one state that never voted for the other party, and that was Arizona. Every other state voted for both parties between the 60s and the 80s. So when you look at that equation, there's 37 states that I predict will go red or blue by 10 points ballpark or more. And then you have the 7 decisive states, which I have from a Trump perspective. So I expect Trump to carry North Carolina. I would only consider it decisive if she got it. But we have 7 decisive states that I call from the Trump perspective. And then we have 6 that I call leaners. And 2 are Trump leaners, less than 10, North Carolina and Texas. And then you got the 4 Democrat leaners, which I'm calling New Mexico, Virginia, New Hampshire, and Minnesota. And we can split that main statewide in Nebraska too, but 4 whole states. And now all 4 of them are on Trump's radar. And they're looking at New Hampshire as what I knew would be a decisive state. And the reason it's decisive to me is because if you pair it with Nevada, it makes 10 electoral votes that could make up for the loss of 10 electoral votes somewhere else, which is Wisconsin or Arizona, which is 11.
You have, in your analysis, 10 out of the 10 counties in New Hampshire have shifted more Republican.
It's gone from Democrat plus 1.3% advantage in 2020, which by my records is the only time at a presidential election they've ever had a D plus registration advantage. New Hampshire, of course, is the most Republican of all New England states, even going back in time. Just like New Hampshire and Maine and Vermont were very tough for Roosevelt, even in the 30s. Traditional Republican states. Trump almost got it in 2016, but there was a huge third-party share of the vote there. And some people still think that Clinton might have taken advantage of those loopholes with the Massachusetts same-day registration voters without ID. But it was 2,600 votes between the two. And then in 2020, you've got to swing to the left in registrations. I do have New Hampshire moving left organically in 2020. Even though I think it was boosted by the COVID election for sure. But now when you look at the stats, all 10 counties have a rightward shift. The shift in Rockingham County is huge. New Hampshire is also weird because the two most urban counties are two of the more Republican counties in the state, Hillsborough and Rockingham. And then we have the Republicans out to a lead with 39,000 plus registration, 4.4%. Trump has run on average 33,000 left of the registrations. So the results in New Hampshire are always left of the registration. Independents drag the result to the left. So Trump will not win the state by 39,000 votes. It'll be left of that. And the average has been 33,000. So that would give Trump a slight window to win the state of about 5,000 votes in the most optimal circumstances. But either way, I can't see either candidate winning the state by more than about 15,000 votes. It would defy 2+ decades worth of predictive analytics.
I just saw an analysis that in North Carolina, the Democrats are down 237,000 votes in early voting. I mean, just sort of a breathtaking number. The Republicans are up some, but the really big story is Democrats aren't turning out.
North Carolina this time in 2020, I believe the Democrats had a lead of about 300,000 ballots at this point in early voting, a week before the election in 2020. And Trump still won the state by 75,000. Now, it also bucked the registration trends, which I've had my eyes on North Carolina for a long time. But mail-in voting expanded, especially with no time to introduce it. It really blew the numbers everywhere. So Western North Carolina was a big concern with the hurricane zone. It looks like they're going to get a pretty solid turnout out there. I think Trump stands to gain about 50 to 70,000 in margin in the 29 counties west of the disaster line. And that would be enough to blot out the gains from either Charlotte or Raleigh that were seen in 2020. And neither of them appear to be on pace to give the kind of Democrat margin that Biden got in 2020. So a week ago, I saw a number that there were 67,000 fewer black votes in North Carolina than at the same point in 2020. And the organizers have taken note of that. And so have, obviously, the media has seen North Carolina now. North Carolina is only D plus 1.4. It was D plus 9.5 when Trump won it 8 years ago. So the trend has been heavy. The working class areas in the Southeast are heavily Republican trending. Trump should do very well with what does come out for the black and Latino vote relative to a standard Republican. So I think North Carolina looks like at least 4 points.
The state that probably had the most attention is Pennsylvania. And you make the point that 63 out of the 67 counties have actually grown more Republican since 2020. I mean, what's your sense of what's happening in Pennsylvania?
So the news is even better than that. They put out the last voter registration update on Monday, and Chester County moved to the right now, too. So that's one of the suburban counties.
So 64 out of 67.
64 out of 67. And the three that are left shifted from 2020. It's Cumberland County. It's a traditional Republican stronghold in south central PA. And then you have Delaware County right west of Philly. And then you have Montgomery County to the northwest of Philly. Those were traditional establishment type Republican counties in the 80s, 90s, and before that. Well, all of them in the last 6 weeks have been hard Republican shifted. Now, since 2020, they're left shifted. But arguably, all 67 counties have a Trump momentum. And most of Pennsylvania is working class. I think it was James Carville that said Pennsylvania is Philadelphia and Pittsburgh with Alabama in the middle. And I think in some of these white working class counties in western Pennsylvania, you could be looking at Wyoming numbers for Trump over Harris. I think he'll probably exceed his white working class margins this election. And obviously in 2020, it was only 80,000 plus ballots against an Irish Catholic from Scranton, Pennsylvania that went by Scranton Joe, and with a mail-in heavy election. Right now, the mail-in gap is about 20% better off for the Republicans than it was at this point in 2020. The firewall they have is less than 400,000 votes when it was 1.1 million 4 years ago.
I was born in Harrisburg and still have family in the Harrisburg area. And my sense is that the more radical the Democrats have been, the more the state has shifted, because it's actually a pretty culturally conservative state.
Absolutely. A big problem they have right now is core Philadelphia. Core Philadelphia has tens of thousands of fewer Democrat registrations this time around than they did last time. I think it's more than 50,000. And I think they're missing about 93,000 mail returns from where they were in 2020 in Philadelphia County. So the urban decline in raw vote dumping is way down in the urban metros of the battleground states. And you could probably extrapolate this and see the same thing in Detroit because it's evident already in Milwaukee County in Wisconsin.
Don't you sense that she just can't get them to turn out?
There's a number of Democrats that are offended by the fact that the party replaced the nominee without a democratic process. That's another great irony, is there is nothing democratic about the Democrat Party. That is an issue there, which they completely usurped the nomination process. And you have to assume that inside the left circles, the progressive circles, there's a resentment about that. Because with an open nomination, you would have at least expected to have a crack at getting your candidate in. It would be like if the Republicans replaced Trump without the voters having to have a say. I think you would have a big-time turnout drag, especially in conservative areas or working class areas. Romney got suburban turnout in 2012, but he did not get working class turnout. And that's why Obama lost 300,000 votes in Pennsylvania and Michigan each. And Romney didn't close the gap other than what Obama lost.
I've been a little surprised at how much Ohio has really moved to the Republicans. And I think Bernie Moreno may become the next senator just out of the underlying current that every year gets more Republican. How do you read Michigan and Wisconsin?
So the whole region is on a glide path like that. Pennsylvania has Ohio 2016 vibes, where you could get a much larger, surprising, 5 points, big margin. Nobody thought Iowa would go to Trump by 9 points in 2016. It went further to the right for Trump than Texas did in 2016 and in 2020. So Pennsylvania looks like it's becoming Ohio. Ohio looks like it's becoming Indiana. Indiana appears to be becoming Kentucky, and Kentucky is becoming West Virginia. So the way I read Michigan is I read Pennsylvania first. Pennsylvania voter registration edges, and it's just unbelievable. Trump ran 605,000 votes to the right of the Democrat registration advantage in 2020. So he lost the quasi-election, as Richard Barris calls it, to Biden by 80,000, but he was still 605 right of their registration advantage. If Trump went 605,000 right of the current registration advantage of 281,000, he would win Pennsylvania by more than 300,000 votes. And it just so happens that Echelon Insights just put out a poll before we got on here showing Trump +6. Which would be about 400,000 plus in margin.
Which also means we'll probably pick up the Senate seat.
Right. So I don't know if I'm bullish enough to go 6 points with the way Pennsylvania Soviet-style ballot collection efforts can go. But to me, it looks like we probably have enough to get Pennsylvania. So Michigan for Trump. Michigan was 33,000 votes left of PA in 2016 when it went to Trump. And then it was 73,000 left in 2020. There were issues, obviously. But the average is 53,000 in the Trump age. So if Pennsylvania is 200 plus, 300 plus to Trump, Michigan sits 50 to 70,000 left of Pennsylvania. It looks to me like the two are very closely correlated. They've moved in the same direction in every election since 1948. And Pennsylvania has voted right of Michigan in every election since 92. So I think that you're likely to find Michigan in Trump's column if he gets a big enough number in PA. Wisconsin is not entirely related.
Isn't the Muslim rebellion against Harris also an additional insurance policy?
They're 2 to 3% of the vote in Michigan. But that minority working class shift in southeastern Michigan is a big deal. And the lower black turnout, the ones that do turn out, vote bigger for Trump. That's big. You have more white working class voters in Michigan than you do in Pennsylvania. That's why sometimes people are wondering if Michigan is going to wind up right of Pennsylvania. Wisconsin, on the other hand, it does correlate to the working class shift in general. I think that New York, to me, is a canary in the coal mine. And I've been writing about that for some time. Now, I don't think Trump is going to win New York, but I have seen consistent polling where I'm not a big believer in polls, but I look at the crosstabs and I look at the tight shot groups. And New York, from August to October, was consistently polling between 12 and 14 points, including from pollsters that had the race at Biden plus 30 in 2020. And I saw inside 10 a couple times, And I've seen a few crazy polls lately that are 18 or so, but I have a feeling that that number is down in the low double digits, if not potentially inside 10, because the New York statewide races were inside 10 points in 2020, which is a good sign. And when New York moves to the right since 1952, that's happened 9 times in presidential elections. It's moved right 9 times. And every single time, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and New Jersey move right with it. And almost every single time, Wisconsin, 1 exception in 2004 and 2 exceptions in Minnesota. So that entire working class set of states moves off of New York. And New York is absolutely set to go heavily to the right this year.
If Trump does anything close to as well as the most recent polls, even though he won't carry the state, he probably will get a majority of the popular vote in the country.
It'll shift hundreds of thousands of popular votes. I mean, New York could shift 1 million in margin if we have a number like that where Trump finishes 10, 12 points off the mark. California, if he eats up 10% of margin, you're looking at a shift of 1.5 million votes. So that's definitely there. Blowout Florida. Texas looks like it's going to be a bloodbath this year, which is going to be a relief for a lot of people who've been smelling the tighter margins in Texas for 10 years.
Do you think Texas ends up staying Republican?
I had been very pessimistic about Texas in the next 8 years, but I am very encouraged, at least by this cycle, because we have a major movement of the Latino working class. It used to be that people thought that demographics, racially and ethnically, were going to doom Texas. But Texas also has a lot of Latinos that have been around since Texas before it was even a state. So they basically are voting like white Americans now anyway. But Texas has had a big Latino shift. 88% of the vote is urban and suburban, so that is a bit of a concern. So the suburban margins, it's impossible to maintain 40-plus point margins when you start getting that kind of population density. So the key to me is getting into Houston proper, Dallas proper, and denting those Democrat margins. So if that can be done successfully and a program to sustain it can happen, then you can trend Texas like Florida. There's no reason not to believe that. But getting control of these urban areas, Harris County is extremely corrupt. It is pretty much the Chicago of the South, if not Atlanta. But Harris County is very bad. Prior to this, what looks like Trump pushing Texas back off to the right this year, I had thought Texas could be vulnerable by 2032.
The scale of the Republican shift in Florida is unbelievable.
It's going to be a 1988 margin. It's going to be the biggest margin since 88. Florida has gone from D+1 in 2020 to R+8 in 2024. And, most people thought the 2022 midterms that Trump couldn't approach Rubio, DeSantis numbers, which were 16 to 19 points. Right now, turnout in Florida is almost R+12. The Republicans have a 750,000 ballot advantage in Florida, and election day is still going to trend Republican. So Trump could be looking at numbers in Florida between 12 and 15 points. And that is going to be truly impressive. And Florida, Michigan, and Pennsylvania all moved together in every election since 1952, except for the safest and most secure election of all time, which was in 2020.
I think there was a headline the other day in the Miami paper that the Republicans were now outvoting the Democrats in Miami-Dade.
Miami's R+5 today. Total turnout is R+5. The county is D+3.5, but it's R+5 turnout as of today. So Trump is going to flip Miami-Dade County. So the Republican nominee for president has carried Miami-Dade County 7 times. So in 1928, 52, 56, 72, 80, 84, and 88, and all 7 times won the presidency or retained the presidency.
But it's just a huge shift. It's not going to be that close.
It's not even close. Florida was a 1-point race between an ice cream cone and a kick in the neck for so many years. And, even in 2020, Biden led in most of the polls in Florida. I didn't think Florida would go to Biden based on the registration shifts. But right now, all 67 counties are more Republican than they were in 2020. There's been a voter roll purge. There's also been a purge in New Hampshire and a purge in Nevada and a purge in Philadelphia County and a purge in Maricopa County. It's funny to me how voter roll purges always only hurt one party.
Yep. Which explains why they hate it.
100%. Michigan is the most corrupt of all the battleground states this year. 83.5% of Michigan's population, total population, is registered to vote. Only 77% of any population is over the age of 18. So there's at least 600,000 people that are on Michigan's voter rolls that don't belong there just based on simple age splits.
Does that lead you to believe that it's possible that some of the votes that will be cast this year will not be actually people who are living?
Absolutely. It's not just possible, it's 100% likely. Now, the extent of how much that will go on, if Trump pulls Pennsylvania on an early night, pulls Georgia, pulls North Carolina, pulls Pennsylvania. That's 270 right there without Wisconsin, Arizona, Nevada. So I don't think that Michigan will be riddled with cheating if Trump puts an early night cap on things. I don't think it's worth getting caught. I don't think it's worth dealing with the fallout of that, because Michigan to me looks like a 3 to 4 point Trump state right now.
You have made a comment which I'm intrigued by, that you see Duval County, which is Jacksonville, as sort of a model for Georgia. What's your reasoning?
When I was doing my forecasting for Georgia, I prefer states that register voters by party, because then I get down at the county levels and I produce a trend analysis, which when you look at the margin of votes won by, ultimately we're talking about number of votes won by. Each county has a certain amount of votes, just like each cloud has a certain amount of rain. And I prefer to get granular like that. Now, some states like Georgia or Texas or Wisconsin don't register voters by party. So I have to infer if I can. And for Wisconsin, a great comp is Iowa. They moved together and they've never been more than 9.8 points apart since 1960. But states like Georgia, I thought logically that North Carolina would potentially be the comp for Georgia, but it's not. In fact, North Carolina voted to the right of Georgia last time for the first time since 1988. So now they're moving in opposite directions. But Florida, not the state, but Duval County, the home of Jacksonville, I started running the numbers on that. First off, they have an almost identical racial and ethnic split. The black, white, and Hispanic populations are almost identical to the number, what the racial demographics are. Of course, you have an urban area of Duval County, you have rural, you have suburbs. And then you have, of course, the swing since 2004. So in 2004, both of those, Duval County, Florida, and Georgia, backed George Bush by a lot. I think it was about 16 points in each. And then they swung to the left in 2008. They both backed McCain, but very narrowly. Duval was less than 2 points. Georgia was 5 points. All right. And then we had in 2012, both of them moved back to the right. So Duval was a little more comfortable for Romney, and Georgia was 7.5, almost 8 points for Mitt Romney. And then in 2016, they both swung left and they hung with Trump, but just by a little bit in Duval and by 5 in Georgia. And in 2020, they swung to the left. Now, I don't know how much of that was an organic swing and how much of it was the COVID election, but Duval flipped narrowly by 3.8% towards Biden, and then Georgia flipped to Biden as well. So they've moved to the same direction every election, and they move by about the same number. And this year, Duval has shifted from D plus 5.9 to D plus 1.9, and the current turnout in Duval is R plus 3.6. So Duval appears to be heading for a Trump win by standard Republican margins. And if Georgia sticks with the swing that we've had since 04, 8, 12, 16, 20, so for the last 5 elections, then Georgia's going to be running back right with Duval. And that pegged me for Georgia at a Trump margin of 5.6%.
My sense was around 5%, the people I trust most watching it. The one other state I have to ask you about, because it's been intriguing how much it's shifted this year, is Nevada. I mean, Clark County was just collapsing, which is Las Vegas, and if the Democrats aren't carrying Clark County by a big margin, they have no hope.
The thing that people have to understand about Nevada is 7 out of 8 votes come from 2 counties, Washoe, which is Metro Reno, and then Clark, which of course is Metro Las Vegas. 7 out of 8 votes. So the 1 out of 8 votes that come from the other 15 county equivalents are massively Trump margins. And I ran them on a county trend based on registration, and I think he's only got about another 10,000 of margin to squeeze out of those 15 counties. So you have to make hay in Clark and Washoe counties. And this could potentially, if it's extrapolated, it could speak to the strength of Trump in core urban areas, which of course, Arizona being one of them, Maricopa County right next door. But right now you have an R plus 5 turnout statewide in Nevada. The state itself is D plus 1. Their registration advantage has been shrinking since Obama's second run, and Trump has always run well to the right of the Democrat voter registration in Nevada. So I think that Nevada is pretty much baked at this point. I don't think that she has a chance to get back in the fight. I really don't even think that the ruling from last week is going to butt that. And here's another important thing. I'd like to talk about sports betting. I'm not a big bettor, but I used to play with those daily lineup drafts in baseball to try to put the brain on baseball. And there's a pick called the chalk pick. So I may not like Mike Trout in the lineup today because I have a hunch, but he always hits left-handers, and here's his stats against lefties. So if you play him enough times, he's going to deliver. So the chalk pick is that Nevada has never voted Republican and Arizona voted Democrat in a presidential election. It's never happened. And Arizona's been a state since 1912. So if we think Nevada is going to Trump, then 112 years of history suggests that Arizona is going to Trump too. So I like to make parallel assumptions like that. And now there's a first time for everything, but I don't think it's this year.
Do you think the problems in Maricopa, which actually we now have a majority, don't we?
Maricopa County has a 181,000 Republican advantage. It was 100,000 4 years ago. So, a lot of these people thinking that party switchers are going to save them. I mean, you'd have to believe that Arizona went from 130,000 Republican lead to 300,000 just so they could vote more Democrat in all 15 counties.
We may pick up the Senate seat there based on the most recent polling.
I saw Carrie Lake at an event a couple weeks ago, and she said that she was only running 2 points behind Trump. Now, the media swings wildly. I saw a Gallego plus 15 poll the other day, which is laughable to me. But, she's definitely running behind Trump. We don't know how much. And I think that the discord there is probably the Latino working class. And the reason I believe that is because I went through Ruben Gallego's social media. I have not found one single foul word about Donald Trump all year. So it tells me that they're sharing voters, just like you have Bob Casey and Slotkin up in the industrial Midwest not wanting to run afoul of Trump supporters.
I thought one of the telling examples of how the momentum is built is the number of Democrats now who've always liked Donald Trump. They've always found it easy to work with him.
Yeah, and the newspapers that won't come out and endorse.
Does that actually have any impact? Historically, they would have been endorsing Harris. Now none of them are endorsing.
So the Washington Post is one I like to look at. They did not endorse Dukakis in 88, but they endorsed Bill Clinton in 92, and then every Democrat through 2020. So every election, 92, 96, 2000, 04, 08, 12, 16, and 20. And they didn't endorse Harris. Well, they've endorsed 3 losing Democrats since they began their endorsement streak. They endorsed Gore, who lost, Kerry, who lost, and Clinton, who lost, and Biden, who won by 42,918 ballots in 3 states. So why is it that they're not willing to endorse a Democrat this time who could lose? It's happened before. It suggests to me that maybe things aren't as close as things have been led to believe.
Tell me for a minute about Captain K's Corner, because it's on Substack. It strikes me that the work you do is really, really interesting. So what do people get if they go to Captain K's Corner?
Well, Captain K's Corner, I started it 2 years ago. I was one of these names. If you look me up, I don't have a lot of nice things written about me in the media. I don't necessarily consider myself an election denier. I would call myself more of a fraud affirmer. And Bob Dole, of course, wrote in his own farewell letter to America that he wondered if heaven would be anything like Kansas and if, like in Chicago, he could vote, if he could vote from Chicago. So I thought it was pretty funny, and it speaks to the existence of this. Now, I can language the complaints of the 2020 election in a way that forces people who are skeptical about those sort of things to engage and think. I think that the 2020 election was part organic. Some of it was contrived by the media. Some of it was because of the virus that was put out there and overhyped. And then other parts of it because the state legislatures allowed their duties to be usurped by executives and secretaries of state and created what Richard Barris, I like to use the term quasi-elections. And we have states where the trends are no longer discernible because the integrity of the election has been completely blown up. And I think that a lot of the numbers I'm seeing now not only confirm Trump momentum this year, but confirm my assumptions from the 2020 election. So a lot of my analyses are built on where I believe elections to be today. Most of my stuff is elections focused. Sometimes I get into the weeds about other things, but I believe that automatic voter registration is the death wish of fair elections. Why do I believe that? Because in 2020, there were 20 states that had automatic voter registration. Biden won 18 of them, and the count was 243 electoral votes to 9. So once you blow up the voter rolls, then you have more entries to which you can assign mail-in ballots. And the longer period of early voting you have for these mail-in ballots to be distributed, they can be filled out and then harvested and then turned back in. Because ultimately, if somebody knows how to trend and analyze counties like I do, they know what the possible extent of a GOP margin is in all of these different counties. So they know if they get X amount of ballots that they will win. So I think that election rigging has taken on a new front with all this sophisticated data and technology, and then the loosening of the law. Ranked choice voting is another great example. When your state is trending hard red, it gives you one last election where your Democrat will win, because usually when the Republicans flip a state, they get about 49% of the vote the first time they flip it. Right? Well, that wouldn't be sufficient to flip your state, so you get one more shot. Captain K's Corner explores a lot of these. I go into the data, and I leave it open for people to criticize. And I found counties that cannot confirm to me that some of their precincts did not have more than 100% turnout in the 2020 election just based on the way they organized their data.
The intensity of rejecting the dishonesty of the 2020 election on the left. I've got an argument the other night with a guy who's normally very rational. And it was like I was violating his religious belief system.
Well, they're going to be election deniers if these trends hold up. The kind of questions I'll ask. So Arizona, when I look at Arizona is the most loyal presidential state in modern political history. So in 48, it voted for Harry Truman, and so did Maricopa County. And then in 52, it flipped to Eisenhower, and so did Maricopa County. And then from 1952 through 2016, it voted for every single Republican presidential candidate except Bob Dole in 96. And the only reason Dole didn't win it is because that was the year that Perot did cost the Republican. He almost got Bush in 92, but he got Dole in 96. All right, Maricopa County, even though Dole lost Arizona, still went to Dole. So Maricopa was red from 52 through 2016, and Trump won it in 2016 with fewer votes than Mitt Romney did in 2012. So in 2020, Trump's gains in Arizona statewide, more than 400,000 net new votes. That was the largest Republican gain in one election cycle in the history of the most loyal Republican state. And in Maricopa County, a gain of 250,000, the largest Republican gain in the history of the most loyal urban Republican county in the United States, only to be outdone by a Joe Biden gain that was 3 times larger than any gain they'd ever had in Maricopa County, in calling the state with 1% of the vote count. So, no, it doesn't make sense. And nobody really wants to get to the bottom of how this happened. But the answer is flooded voter rolls, ballot harvesting, and an extensive period of time to contribute these ballots, and an overarching media narrative. The thing that Trump is truly commanding this year is the media narrative. I believe he had the vote in 2020. He did not have the narrative. This time, he appears to have them both.
It's all amazing. Look, I hope we get a chance to continue this friendship and to continue this kind of work. You are remarkable. I want to thank you for joining me. I want to remind our listeners that they can find your reporting and all the latest election news on Substack at skeshel.substack.com. We'll have that on our show page. But I really appreciate you taking this time to talk with us. This has been very enlightening.
Likewise, I appreciate the opportunity to come on with your audience. I've met a lot of new audiences here in the last couple of weeks. I encourage everybody to keep your eyes open. Do not go to sleep on election night. Make sure you get out there and vote. Make sure you take your friends that are like-minded to vote. This is an important time, and we're going to have to get out there and do all the fundamentals right. So thank you so much for the invite, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you to my guest, Seth Keshel. You can get a link to his Substack on our show page at newtsworld.com. Newt's World is produced by Gingrich 360 and iHeartMedia. Our executive producer is Garnsey Sloan. Our researcher is Rachel Peterson. The artwork for the show was created by Steve Penley. Special thanks to the team at Gingrich 360. If you've been enjoying Newt's World, I hope you'll go to Apple Podcasts and both rate us with 5 stars and give us a review so others can learn what it's all about. Right now, listeners of Newt's World can sign up for my 3 free weekly columns at Gingrich360.com/newsletter. I'm Newt Gingrich. This is Newt's World.